In a remote forest property somewhere in China, police discovered the body of a young woman. She had been found inside an abandoned factory building. The place was quiet. There were no clear witnesses, no useful security camera footage. But the body told investigators one thing immediately: this was not an ordinary murder. The victim was a 27-year-old woman named Zhu Hui. She worked as a sales representative for a furniture company. According to investigators, she appeared to have fought back before she died. There were injuries on her body that suggested she had tried to run, struggled, and attempted to save herself, but she never made it out. What disturbed investigators even more were the wounds found on her body. They were unusually precise. The depth of the cuts was consistent. The placement was controlled. These did not look like wounds made by someone acting in a blind rage. They looked like the work of someone who understood anatomy, someone familiar with blades, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. At the scene, police also found a bloody footprint. It was a size 40, small, clear, and extremely important. That footprint would later become one of the most important clues in the entire case. Outside the factory, investigators also found tire tracks. After comparing them, police connected the tracks to a stolen white sedan. But there was one problem. The road cameras around the forest property never captured the car entering or leaving. That meant the killer likely knew another way in, a hidden road, a side route, a path without cameras. In other words, this person probably knew the area well. At first, police believed the killer might be connected to the forest property itself. That led them to the owner of the property. His name was Guo Haisheng. Guo was in his 50s. He had lost his first wife years earlier and had raised a son and daughter mostly on his own. Later, he remarried a younger woman, but 5 years before Zhu Hui was found dead, Lin Ji suddenly disappeared, and she was not the only one. A male worker from the same forest property, Zhao Zhengyang, disappeared around the same time. Back then, Guo Haisheng told police that his wife had left after a family conflict. There was no strong evidence of a crime at the time, so the case remained a long-term missing persons case. But now, 5 years later, another woman had been found dead on Guo's property, and investigators learned that Zhu Hui had recently been close to Guo Haisheng. Their connection may have started through business, but it appeared to have become more personal. A young woman was dead. The property owner's wife had disappeared 5 years earlier. A male worker had disappeared with her, and now another woman connected to the same family had been killed. That was already enough to make investigators uneasy. But the real shock came moments later, because behind the abandoned factory, a police dog found something buried in the mud. As police expanded the search area, a police dog suddenly stopped behind the factory building. It barked repeatedly at a patch of muddy ground. The search team began digging, and soon they uncovered two sets of human remains, one male, one female. The remains had been buried for a long time. A forensic examiner estimated that both had been dead for at least 5 years. This discovery changed everything. One abandoned factory, one recently murdered young woman, and two skeletons from 5 years earlier. At that point, coincidence was no longer a reasonable explanation. Police reopened the missing persons records from 5 years before. The two missing people from that old case were Guo Haisheng's wife, Lin Ji, and the forest worker, Zhao Zhengyang. No investigators had reason to believe the two skeletons belonged to them. That meant this property had not just been the scene of one murder. Something had happened there 5 years earlier, and now, another killing had brought that old secret back to the surface. Police turned their attention back to Guo Haisheng. When questioned, Guo appeared unusually calm. He admitted that he knew Zhu Hui, but he insisted their relationship was only business. When investigators asked about his son, Guo Kao, his behavior changed. He became evasive. That reaction caught the attention of the detectives. Guo Kao was Guo Haisheng's son. He had also been one of Zhu Hui's former high school classmates. But there was another strange detail. Guo Kao had disappeared 5 years earlier as well. That meant after Guo Haisheng's wife went missing, his son also vanished from public view. His family seemed to have fractured around the same time. His wife disappeared. A male worker disappeared. His son disappeared. And now a young woman connected to the family had been murdered. Police began to realize this was not just a case about jealousy or a business dispute. It felt more like a family secret that had been buried for years. And Zhu Hui's death had finally exposed the first crack. Then traffic police brought in another lead. On the night of the murder, a white sedan had refused to stop at a traffic checkpoint. The driver sped away. A person dressed in black got out of the car and ran. A traffic officer gave chase, but the suspect was fast, controlled, physically strong. The officer chased him for a long distance, but the person escaped. Still, the car was left behind. Inside the vehicle, police found 3 important items. First, a bloody size 40 footprint matching the crime scene. Second, a burlap sack often used for carrying lumber. And third, a pearl necklace. That necklace would become one of the most important objects in the case. And soon, it would point investigators in a direction no one expected. With the new evidence, police began moving closer to the truth. But then, the case took a violent turn. While investigators were traveling near the forest property, a heavy truck suddenly rammed into their vehicle. After the crash, a masked person in black got out of the truck and moved toward the injured officers. He was not trying to escape. He was looking for something. The pearl necklace. Police managed to stop him. When they pulled off the mask, they were stunned. The man was Guo Haisheng, the owner of the forest property. Once inside the interrogation room, Guo's attitude changed. He confessed quickly. He said that 5 years earlier, he had discovered his wife, Lin Ji, was having an affair with the worker, Zhao Zhengyang. According to Guo, the two were not only betraying him, they were also planning to take his property, so he killed Zhao Zhengyang. Then he killed Lin Ji. He also admitted that he killed Zhu Hui. He claimed Zhu Hui had become greedy, kept asking him for money, and pushed him too far. On the surface, the confession seemed to explain everything. There was motive, there was opportunity, and there was a confession. But investigators were not convinced. Several details did not match. First, the person in black who escaped from the traffic officer was described as slim and extremely fast. Guo Haisheng was in his 50s. He had a broader build. His body type and physical ability did not match the person who had run from police that night. Second, the footprint at the scene was size 40. Guo's shoe size was 42. Third, the wounds on Zhu Hui's body were unusually precise. Guo may have known the forest property. He may have been familiar with tools, but nothing about him suggested the kind of anatomical knowledge needed to create wounds that clean and controlled. Police began to suspect that Guo Haisheng was lying, but not to protect himself. He was protecting someone else. Someone with size 40 shoes, someone fast enough to outrun a trained officer, someone familiar with anatomy, blades, and body structure, someone with a personal connection to Zhu Hui, or a personal reason to hate her. Investigators turned back to Guo's family. His son, Guo Cao, had been missing for 5 years. Zhu Hui had been Guo Cao's high school classmate. If Guo Cao was still alive, he may have had a connection to her. Police began searching through Guo Haisheng's assets and hidden properties. Eventually, they found an apartment that had not been regularly used. Inside that apartment, investigators found a telescope. The telescope was pointed at a hidden makeshift shelter, and inside that shelter was Guo Cao. The son had never truly disappeared, he had been hidden. When police approached him, Guo Cao fired a gun and ran. He fled onto the rooftop. But then something strange happened. When his sister, Guo Lin, appeared, Guo Cao suddenly froze. He looked terrified. He stared at her for only a few seconds. Then, in front of the police and his sister, he jumped from the building. At first, police believed Guo Cao had killed himself because he was guilty. But soon, they realized the truth was far more disturbing. When police searched Guo Cao's hiding place, they found animal specimens, preserved remains, and surgical tools. The room looked like a sealed private world. Disturbing objects were scattered across the space. Among them were pieces of women's nail art. At first glance, everything seemed to point to Guo Cao. He looked like a disturbed man who had spent years in isolation. He seemed like the kind of suspect who could have tortured animals and killed Zhu Hui. If the investigation had stopped there, Guo Cao might have looked like the perfect answer. but investigators still had doubts. The traffic officer, who chased the person in black, remembered the suspect's movements clearly. The runner was controlled, balanced, athletic, almost trained, but when Guo Keo ran from police, his movements were chaotic and clumsy. He did not move like an athlete, he moved like someone panicking. So police began looking into Guo Keo and Guo Lin's childhood. That was when an entirely different picture emerged. Guo Keo had always been soft and physically weak. As a child, he was often bullied. The person who protected him was his older sister. Guo Lin was different. She had a strong personality. She was aggressive. She had been a track athlete when she was younger, and her speed was exceptional. More importantly, she had a history of harming small animals. Later, she learned how to make animal specimens. This forced investigators to rethink the entire case. The size 40 footprint, the strong athletic ability, the knowledge of blades and specimen making. The missing pearl necklace. None of those clues truly pointed to Guo Keo. They pointed to Guo Lin. The quiet daughter, the woman who had calmly served tea when police first visited the house. Police now understood the possibility. The real killer was not the father, and not the brother. It was Guo Lin. But why would she kill? The answer was buried in her relationship with her father. Guo Lin lost her mother when she was young. At some point, her father gave her the pearl necklace that had belonged to her late mother. For most people, that might have been a simple memorial gesture. But for Guo Lin, it meant something much deeper. In her mind, the necklace did not just connect her to her mother. It gave her a role. She began to see herself as the woman of the house. And from that point forward, any woman who got close to her father became a threat. Her stepmother, Lin Ji, was a threat. Zhu Hui was also a threat. 5 years earlier, Guo Lin discovered that Lin Ji was involved with the worker, Zhao Zhengyang. She believed Lin Ji had betrayed her father and invaded her place in the family, so she killed Zhao Zhengyang. Then she killed Lin Jie. Her younger brother, Guo Keo, witnessed everything. The shock broke him psychologically. When Guo Haisheng arrived and saw what had happened, he did not call the police. He chose to protect his daughter. He buried the bodies, he hid his son, and he created the appearance that the missing people had simply left for 5 years. That secret stayed buried. Then Zhu Hui entered the picture. She became close to Guo Haisheng, to Guo Lin. That meant another woman was trying to take her place, so she used her father's phone to lure Zhu Hui to the forest property. Then she killed her, but she made one mistake. After leaving the scene, she ran into the traffic officer, and during the escape, the pearl necklace was left behind. That necklace mattered more to her than anything. To recover it, Guo Haisheng rammed the police vehicle. To protect his daughter, he confessed to every murder. This family had been hiding the truth for 5 years, but now Guo Lin was losing control. Once Guo Lin realized police were getting close, she disappeared. At the same time, another person vanished, a doctor connected to the case. She was the wife of one of the officers. Soon after, Guo Lin called the police. She demanded that officers bring her father, Guo Haisheng, back to the forest property. She wanted to exchange him for the hostage. When police arrived, Guo Lin had a knife against the hostage. She admitted that she had killed them all. Her father had only confessed to protect her. She said she wanted to see him. During the standoff, investigators finally understood the full picture. Guo Lin did not kill for money. She did not kill because of a simple argument. She killed because of an extreme need to possess and control. She saw her father as the one person who belonged to her. Every woman who came close to him became an enemy. Her stepmother was an enemy. Zhu Hui was an enemy. And her brother Guo Keo became something else. A tool she could control. Police later believed that Guo Lin had held deep psychological control over her brother for years. Guo Keo depended on her. He feared her. On the rooftop, he did not jump simply because he felt guilty. He jumped because Guo Lin had conditioned him to obey. He became the person she used to take the blame. Guo Lin believed that if her brother died as the suspect, her father could come home. But Guo Haisheng could not survive the weight of what had happened. He could not accept his son's death, and he could not keep carrying the consequences of protecting his daughter. He attempted to take his own life while in custody. That broke the final structure inside Guo Lin's mind. At the forest property, Guo Haisheng was brought in. Once again, he placed the pearl necklace on his daughter. For a brief moment, Guolin lowered her guard. Police moved in and arrested her. The case was finally over, but the questions it left behind were far more complicated than a typical murder case. Guo Haisheng believed he was protecting his daughter. Guolin believed she was protecting her family. Guo Kao believed he had to obey his sister. But in the end, that twisted version of love destroyed everyone around it. The most frightening part of this case is not just the body in the abandoned factory, and it is not just the two skeletons buried behind it. It is the way one family turned control, obsession, and silence into something they called love. Real love does not require someone to disappear. Real love does not demand loyalty through fear, and real love does not ask another person to die in its name. When love becomes control, it stops being love, it becomes something dangerous. And in this case, every tragedy began there.